Now let's begin. The call came at 2:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. Russell Lyon was already awake, reading case files in his home office, a habit from 30 years as a federal corruption investigator that retirement couldn't break. When his phone lit up with Preston's name, his stomach dropped. His son never called this late unless something was catastrophically wrong. "Dad." Preston's voice cracked like broken glass. "They took her. Emma's gone." Russell was on his feet, phone pressed to his ear. "Slow down. Who took Emma?" "The Coolies." Milton and Betsy filed an emergency custody order. The judge signed it at 9 p.m. Sheriff showed up at my door with a court order. I couldn't. Preston's words dissolved into ragged sobs that made Russell's chest tighten. "I haven't seen my daughter in 6 days. They won't let me talk to her. They're saying I'm unfit." "Dad, I can't lose her too." Russell's jaw clenched. He'd met Milton and Betsy Cooley exactly 3 times, and each encounter had left him with the same impression: polished, wealthy people who viewed everyone else as pieces on their personal chessboard. After their daughter Brittany died 2 years ago, they'd transformed from distant in-laws into omnipresent forces in Preston's life, showing up unannounced, questioning his parenting, making subtle threats about what's best for Emma. "Where are you?" Russell asked, already pulling clothes from his closet. "Home. I haven't slept since. I can't think straight. My lawyer says we have a hearing in 3 days, but the Coolies have some heavyweight attorney from Chicago. He's already filed briefs claiming I'm neglectful, that Emma's in danger with me." "Dad, they're lying. Everything they're saying is." "I know." Russell grabbed his keys, his laptop bag, the leather briefcase he hadn't opened in 2 years. "Text me the case number and the lawyer's name. I'm 400 miles away. I'll be there by morning." "Dad, their lawyer is connected. He's gotten judges removed from cases before. They have money, influence." "Preston." Russell's voice carried the authority that once made corrupt officials confess in interview rooms. "I've taken down senators and corporate raiders. I'm not worried about Milton Cooley and his Chicago attorney. Get some sleep. We're getting Emma back." He hung up and stood in his bedroom, the pre-dawn darkness pressing against the windows. Russell Lyon was 62, with silver hair and the lean build of someone who still ran 5 miles every morning. His face showed the lines of a man who'd spent decades staring at humanity's worst impulses: embezzlers, fraudsters, officials who sold public trust for private gain. He'd thought he was done with that world. Then he'd gotten the call. Russell loaded his car and started driving south, the highway empty except for long-haul trucks and his own dark thoughts. Preston was his only child, born late in Russell's life after years of prioritizing career over family. His ex-wife, Patricia, had raised Preston mostly alone while Russell chased cases across the country. When Patricia died from cancer 8 years ago, Russell had tried to rebuild the relationship with his son, showing up for birthdays, holidays, trying to make up for decades of absence. Preston had been gracious about it, never once throwing Russell's failures as a father in his face. Then Preston met Brittany Cooley at a hospital fundraiser. She was beautiful, charming, from a wealthy family that owned medical supply companies across the Midwest. They married within a year. Emma was born 10 months later. For a while, everything seemed perfect. Russell remembered the first time he'd met Milton Cooley. The man had a politician's smile and a banker's eyes, cold calculation beneath manufactured warmth. Betsy was worse, all passive-aggressive comments wrapped in concern. "Preston's a teacher? How quaint. I suppose not everyone needs to be ambitious." They'd made it clear that their daughter had married beneath her station. When Brittany died in a car accident on a rain-slicked highway, the Coolies' grief manifested as control. They wanted Emma to live with them during this difficult time. When Preston refused, they started showing up at his house daily, taking Emma to their estate for visits that stretched longer each time. Preston had tried to set boundaries. The Coolies responded with lawyers. Russell pulled into a truck stop as the sun rose, bought coffee he didn't taste, and opened his laptop. The case number Preston had texted led to a digital file that made Russell's blood pressure spike. The emergency order claimed Preston was emotionally unstable and potentially neglectful, citing incidents that supposedly put Emma at risk: leaving her alone in a car, forgetting to pick her up from preschool, erratic behavior. The supporting affidavits came from teachers, neighbors, people who supposedly witnessed Preston's decline. Russell recognized the setup when he saw one. He'd built corruption cases on flimsier foundations than this, but he'd also learned how to dismantle them. The coolies had been planning this for months, planting seeds, building a narrative. They had resources and connections. What they didn't have was Russell Lyon looking into their background. He made calls while driving, reaching out to contacts from his bureau days. "Sarah, I need a favor." Full background on Milton and Betsy Cooley, Chicago area. Financial records, business dealings, litigation history. Everything. His old protege, now a senior analyst at FinCEN, promised results within hours. Russell made similar calls to 3 other people, a private investigator in Illinois, a court clerk who owed him a favor, and a retired FBI agent who specialized in family court fraud. By the time Russell pulled into Preston's driveway at 8:30 a.m., he had the skeleton of something interesting. Milton Cooley's medical supply company had been involved in 2 fraud investigations, both settled quietly. Betsy served on the board of a children's charity that had some questionable expense reports. Nothing conclusive, but enough to suggest the Cooley's perfect facade had cracks. Preston answered the door looking hollowed out. He'd lost weight. His eyes were sunken and red-rimmed, his normally neat appearance disheveled. Russell pulled him into a hug. "She's only 4 years old," Preston whispered. "She doesn't understand why I haven't come for her." "Dad, what if they convince her I abandoned her? What if—" "We're going to fix this," Russell said firmly. "Show me everything. Every document, every email, every interaction with the Coolies. I want to see the whole picture." They spread papers across Preston's kitchen table. The emergency custody order was based on 3 sworn affidavits. Mrs. Eleanor Hughes, Emma's preschool teacher, claimed Preston had forgotten to pick Emma up twice in 1 month. Mr. Stan Nolan, a neighbor, reported seeing Preston leave Emma alone in his car while he ran into a store. Dr. Wilson Klein, a family therapist, stated that Preston showed signs of severe depression and was possibly unfit to care for a child. "This is all bullshit," Preston said, his voice shaking with exhaustion and rage. "I never forgot to pick up Emma. Mrs. Hughes loves her. There's no way she'd say that." And Stan Nolan. He laughed bitterly. "We've exchanged maybe 10 words total. He wouldn't know if I was depressed or dancing in the streets." Russell studied the affidavits with the careful attention that had made him legendary in the bureau. Something was off. The language was too similar across all 3 statements, too polished. These weren't organic witness accounts. They were crafted narratives. Did the Coolies know these people? Russell asked. Preston shook his head. "Not that I know of." "Wait, Milton mentioned meeting Emma's teacher at a school fundraiser a few months ago. He made a big donation to the preschool." There it was. The first thread to pull. Russell had seen this before in corruption cases. Wealthy people who believed their money could reshape reality to their preferences. They'd bought testimonies, probably without the witnesses even fully understanding what they were participating in. A generous donation to a struggling preschool, a friendly conversation with a teacher, maybe an offhand comment about concerns regarding Preston's well-being. The teacher wants to help, signs something thinking she's supporting a child's welfare. Same pattern with the neighbor, the therapist. "I need you to get some rest," Russell said. "Real sleep. You're no good to Emma if you collapse." "I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see her face when the sheriff." "Preston." Russell gripped his son's shoulder. "I'm here now. This is what I do. Trust me." Preston nodded slowly, the fight draining out of him. He looked 16 again, the way he had when Patricia was dying and he'd needed Russell to be the strong one. Russell hadn't been there enough back then. He wouldn't make that mistake again. While Preston slept, Russell worked. He called his contact at the preschool board and learned that Milton Cooley had indeed donated $50,000 to their new playground fund, 2 weeks before the teacher signed her affidavit. He tracked down Stan Nolan's address and discovered the man was 3 months behind on his mortgage until a mysterious payment cleared his debt around the same time. Dr. Wilson Klein had never actually met Preston. His evaluation was based entirely on information provided by the Coolies themselves. The pattern crystallized. The Coolies had manufactured a crisis, bought witnesses, and used their connections to rush through an emergency order before Preston could mount a defense. It was elegant in its ruthlessness, and it would have worked against someone without resources. But Preston had Russell, and Russell had spent 3 decades learning how entitled people thought they were above the law. He opened a new document on his laptop and began writing. Not a legal brief. He'd leave that to Preston's attorney. This was something else, something he'd done countless times in corruption investigations. He was building a timeline, tracking money, connecting dots that the coolies thought they'd hidden. Every donation, every payment, every conversation. He was constructing their cage out of their own actions. By the time Preston woke up 8 hours later, Russell had made 17 more calls and filled 40 pages with notes. He looked up as his son shuffled into the kitchen, slightly more human after sleep. "The hearing is in 2 days," Russell said. "I need you to do exactly what I say. Can you do that?" Preston nodded. "What did you find?" Russell smiled, the predatory expression that used to make corrupt officials start negotiating. "Everything we need. But we're going to need one more thing." "What?" "We're going to need the coolies to feel completely secure. Don't contact them. Don't fight. Let them think they've already won. Can you do that? Can you let them believe they've taken your daughter and you're powerless to stop it?" Preston's face went hard. "If it gets Emma back, I can do anything." "Good." Russell closed his laptop. "Because in 2 days, we're going to walk into that courtroom, and I'm going to hand Judge Romano a folder. And when he reads what's inside, the coolies are going to learn something important." "What's that?" Russell's smile didn't reach his eyes. "They should have checked who your father was before they started this war." The Cooley estate sat on 12 acres in the most exclusive suburb of Chicago, behind iron gates and manicured hedges. Preston had only been there a handful of times during his marriage to Brittany, always feeling like an outsider in rooms filled with antique furniture and people who measured worth in stock portfolios. 24 hours before the custody hearing, Milton Cooley stood in his study, reviewing documents with his attorney, a silver-haired shark named Carl Grady, who charged $800 an hour and had never lost a family court case. "It's done," Grady said, his voice smooth as silk. Judge Romano signed the temporary order. "The hearing tomorrow is a formality. We present our evidence, Preston's public defender fumbles through some weak objections, and you walk out with permanent custody. 6 months later, you can petition for full adoption. The boy will be out of Emma's life completely." Milton poured himself scotch from a crystal decanter. "You're certain? No surprises?" "None. Our witnesses are solid. We've documented a pattern of neglect that any judge will find compelling. And frankly, Preston doesn't have the resources to fight us. He's a high school English teacher living paycheck to paycheck. His court-appointed attorney is overwhelmed and underprepared." "What about the father?" Betsy asked from the doorway. She wore pearls and a cashmere sweater that probably cost more than Preston made in a month. Preston mentioned his father was coming. Grady waved dismissively. "Russell Lyon, retired federal investigator, lives in some small town 400 miles away. He's got no standing in this case, and even if he tries to interfere, he's out of his jurisdiction and out of his depth. This isn't a federal corruption case, it's family court. Different arena entirely." Milton smiled. This was almost too easy. When Brittany died, he'd been devastated, his only child, gone in an instant. But grief had been quickly replaced by clarity. Emma was a Cooley, the last of their bloodline. She deserved better than being raised in a middle-class neighborhood by a man who thought teaching teenagers about Shakespeare was an acceptable career. Emma deserved the Cooley legacy, the best schools, the right connections, a future worthy of her lineage. Preston had been a temporary inconvenience, a mediocre husband who'd gotten lucky when Brittany had rebelled against her parents' expectations. Milton had tolerated him during the marriage, barely. After Brittany's death, he'd made it clear that Preston's role as father was negotiable. When Preston refused to hand over Emma willingly, Milton had simply bought what he needed. Witnesses, testimonies, a judge who owed favors to people Milton played golf with. It was how the world worked when you had money and connections. People like Preston never understood that. "Where is Emma now?" Milton asked. "In the nursery with the au pair," Betsy said. "She asked for her father again this morning. I told her that Daddy was sick and couldn't visit yet, but that we'd take such good care of her. She's adjusting well?" Betsy hesitated. "She cries at night sometimes. Calls for Preston. But children are resilient. Once the adoption is finalized, she'll forget him entirely. We're her family now." Milton raised his glass. "To family." Grady clinked glasses with him, already mentally spending his fee. None of them noticed the small detail in the case file. A new attorney of record filed that morning for Preston Lyon. Not a public defender, but a high-powered family law specialist from downstate. someone with a reputation for destroying opposing counsel in custody battles. And none of them knew that Russell Lyon was, at that moment, sitting in a judge's chambers with documents that would unravel everything they'd built. The courthouse was an imposing building of limestone and glass, the kind of architecture designed to make people feel small before the weight of justice. Russell arrived at 7:30 a.m., 3 hours before the hearing, carrying a leather briefcase that had been his companion through hundreds of investigations. He'd barely slept, spending the night assembling the final pieces of his case. Not a legal case. Preston's new attorney, a brilliant woman named Genevieve Carlson, who owed Russell a favor from a case years ago, was handling that. Russell's work was different. He'd built a trap, and now he was setting it. Judge Isaac Romano's clerk, a sharp-eyed woman named Erin Villarreal, recognized Russell immediately. They'd worked together when she was a paralegal in the U.S. Attorney's Office, before she'd moved to family court. "Mr. Lyon," she said, her voice carefully neutral. "The Cooley hearing isn't until 10. I need 10 minutes with Judge Romano. In chambers." Before the hearing, Erin's eyebrows rose. "That's highly irregular. If this is about the case, all communications should go through." "It's not about the case," Russell lied smoothly. "It's about Judge Romano's safety and the court's integrity." 10 minutes, Erin. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't critical. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Wait here." Judge Romano appeared 15 minutes later, a stern man in his late 50s with a reputation for running his courtroom with absolute control. He'd been appointed to the bench 12 years ago after a distinguished career as a prosecutor. He didn't look happy about the interruption. "Mr. Lyon, this is inappropriate," Romano said. "If you're here about the Cooley custody matter." "I'm here about fraud and witness tampering," Russell said quietly, "and about how Milton Cooley has compromised your court. But if you'd rather discover that during the hearing, in front of everyone, I can wait." Romano's expression shifted from annoyed to cautious. "My chambers. 5 minutes." Once the door closed, Russell opened his briefcase and withdrew a thin folder. "I'm going to tell you a story, Your Honor, and then I'm going to give you evidence that will make you very angry." He laid out the timeline. Milton Cooley's $50,000 donation to Emma's preschool, 2 weeks before the teachers signed an affidavit. Stan Nolan's mysteriously cleared mortgage debt, cleared by a shell company that Russell had tracked back to Cooley Medical Supplies accounting firm. Dr. Wilson Klein's evaluation of a patient he'd never met, paid for by a consulting fee from guess who. "This is witness tampering," Russell said calmly. "It's fraud on the court. And it gets worse." He slid across bank records showing payments from Cooley Medical Supply to a lobbying firm. That firm's senior partner played golf twice a month with Judge Romano. They'd had lunch 3 weeks ago, the day before Romano signed the emergency custody order. "I'm not suggesting you were paid off, Your Honor," Russell said carefully. "But I am saying that Milton Cooley knew exactly which judge would be sympathetic to his case, and he made sure his people had lunch with you right before filing. He's manipulating your court through your professional relationships." Romano's face had gone from cautious to furious. "Do you have proof of these payments?" Russell handed over documents, bank records, shell company filings, donation receipts, mortgage payment records. Everything traceable, everything documented with the thoroughness of a federal investigation. "I have 30 years of experience tracking money through corrupt systems, Your Honor. This is what I do." Milton and Betsy Cooley manufactured a custody crisis, bought witnesses, and used their connections to steal my granddaughter from her father. And they did it through your court. Romano studied the documents, his hands trembling slightly with anger. "Why didn't you bring this to the attorneys? File proper motions." "Because proper channels take time. My granddaughter has been away from her father for 7 days. Every day she's with the Cooleys. They're poisoning her against Preston, telling her that her father abandoned her. I need this ended today, and I need the Cooleys to face consequences for what they've done." The judge was quiet for a long moment. "This evidence, you obtained it legally? Every document is from public records, court filings, or provided by cooperating witnesses." "I've done nothing illegal, Your Honor. I just know how to find information that people would rather keep hidden." Romano closed the folder. "If these allegations are true, and I emphasize if, this is one of the most egregious cases of fraud on the court I've seen in my career." "They're true," Russell said. "And in about 2 hours, you're going to have Milton and Betsy Cooley in your courtroom, under oath, probably planning to present their fraudulent evidence like they've already won. I need you to let them. Excuse me. Russell smiled. Let them present their case. Let their attorney question Preston. Let them think they're winning. And then, when they're fully committed, when they've perjured themselves in front of witnesses, that's when you lower the boom. Because I want their downfall to be public. I want Emma to have a court record showing exactly what kind of people her grandparents are. And I want them arrested in front of everyone they brought to watch their victory. Romano's eyes narrowed. You want me to turn my courtroom into a trap? I want you to deliver justice, Russell corrected. The trap is already set. The Coolies did that themselves when they decided to lie under oath. The judge studied Russell for a long moment. You know I could hold you in contempt for ex parte communication. You could, but you won't. Because you're as angry as I am that someone tried to corrupt your court. Romano picked up the folder. I'll review this evidence. If it's as solid as you claim, we'll proceed accordingly. But Mr. Lyon, his voice hardened. If you've wasted my time or misrepresented anything, I'll make sure you regret it. I'd expect nothing less, Your Honor. Russell left the chambers and found Preston pacing the hallway with Genevieve Carlson, a sharp woman in her 40s who looked like she could reduce opposing counsel to tears just by staring at them. Your father just committed about 6 ethical violations, she said dryly. I hope it was worth it. It was, Russell said. How's Preston holding up? I'm terrified, Preston admitted. Dad, what if this doesn't work? What if? Russell gripped his son's shoulder. It's going to work. Trust me. In 2 hours, you're going to have Emma back. And the Coolies are going to understand exactly what happens when you go after my family. At 9:45 a.m., the courtroom began filling up. Milton and Betsy Cooley arrived with an entourage. Their attorney Carl Grady, several well-dressed supporters, and even a few reporters from society pages. They looked confident, relaxed. Betsy wore a designer dress that screamed wealth and respectability. Milton's suit probably cost $5,000. They saw Preston and Russell, and Milton's lips curved into a small, contemptuous smile. Preston was wearing his best suit, which still looked cheap next to Milton's, and Russell wore a simple gray suit that had been good enough for testifying before Senate committees. Mr. Lyon, Milton said, his voice dripping with false sympathy. I understand this must be difficult for you, but surely you can see that Emma needs stability. Preston is barely holding things together, and a child needs. Save it for the judge, Russell said flatly. You'll want to conserve your energy for what's coming. Milton's smile widened, but Russell saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. Good. Let him wonder. At 10 a.m. sharp, Judge Romano entered the courtroom. Everyone rose. The judge took his seat, opened a folder, Russell's folder, and looked out at the assembled crowd. In the matter of the Cooley emergency custody petition, Romano began, his voice carrying absolute authority. We're here to determine the best interests of the minor child, Emma Lyon, age 4. Mr. Grady, I believe you're representing the petitioners. Yes, Your Honor. Grady stood, radiating confidence. If it please the court, we have substantial evidence showing that Preston Lyon is unfit to care for his daughter, and that immediate intervention was necessary to protect the child's welfare. Proceed, Romano said, his face giving nothing away. For the next 40 minutes, Grady presented the Cooley's case. He called Mrs. Hughes, the preschool teacher, who testified tearfully about Preston forgetting to pick up Emma. He presented Stan Nolan's affidavit about seeing Emma left alone. He quoted Dr. Klein's evaluation suggesting Preston was suffering from depression and possibly unable to care for his daughter. Preston sat rigid beside Russell, his hands clenched into fists as lie after lie filled the courtroom. Russell put a steady hand on his son's arm, keeping him calm. Not yet. Let them finish building their own trap. Grady concluded with a flourish. Your Honor, the Cooleys are Emma's last living maternal relatives. They have the resources, the stability, and the genuine love for this child to provide what her father simply cannot. We ask the court to make the temporary custody permanent, in Emma's best interests. Milton and Betsy nodded solemnly, playing the role of concerned grandparents perfectly. Miss Carlson? Judge Romano said. Response. Genevieve stood, and Russell felt the temperature in the room shift. Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness. Russell Lyon. Grady frowned. Objection. Mr. Lyon has no standing in this matter. He's not a party to. He's the child's grandfather, Genevieve said smoothly. and he has relevant testimony about the petitioner's conduct. If Mr. Grady would like to argue that grandparents aren't relevant in custody matters, I'd be happy to let him make that case. Romano nodded. I'll allow it. Mr. Lyon, please take the stand. Russell walked to the witness box, was sworn in, and settled into the chair with the ease of someone who'd testified hundreds of times. He made eye contact with Milton, saw the first real flash of concern cross the man's face. Mr. Lyon, Genevieve began, can you describe your professional background? I spent 30 years as a federal investigator specializing in corruption, fraud, and white-collar crime. I've investigated senators, corporate executives, and organized crime figures. I'm trained in forensic accounting, interview techniques, and document analysis. And when you learned your granddaughter had been taken from your son, what did you do? I investigated the petitioners, Russell said simply, because their allegations against my son didn't make sense. Preston is a devoted father. So I did what I always do. I followed the money. Grady shot to his feet. Objection. This is completely irrelevant too. Overruled, Romano said, his voice hard. I want to hear this. Continue, Mr. Lyon. Russell opened a folder. I discovered that 2 weeks before Mrs. Hughes signed her affidavit, Milton Cooley donated $50,000 to her preschool. That the day after Stan Nolan signed his affidavit, his overdue mortgage was mysteriously paid off by a shell company connected to Cooley Medical Supply. That Dr. Klein never actually met my son. His entire evaluation was based on information provided by the Cooleys themselves and paid for by a $5,000 consulting fee. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Milton's face went pale. Betsy gripped her husband's arm. Your Honor, this is outrageous. Grady sputtered. These are baseless accusations. Are they? Romano's voice cut through the noise like a blade. Because I have the same documents in front of me, Mr. Grady. Bank records. Donation receipts. All public record. Mr. Lyon, continue. Russell looked directly at the Cooleys. Milton and Betsy Cooley didn't file an emergency custody petition because Emma was in danger. They filed it because they want to erase my son from their granddaughter's life. They think their money and connections make them above the law. They manufactured evidence, bought witnesses, and committed fraud on this court. And they did it because they thought no one would be paying attention. This is a travesty. Milton stood up, his face red. Your Honor, we love Emma. Everything we've done has been for her protection. Preston is unstable, he's... Sit down, Mr. Cooley, Romano said coldly. You'll have your chance to testify. Under oath. In fact, I insist on it. Bailiff, swear in Mr. and Mrs. Cooley. The next hour was devastating. Under Genevieve's relentless questioning, Milton and Betsy's case crumbled. Milton stammered through explanations about his donations being unrelated to the affidavits, until Genevieve presented the timeline showing the donations occurred within days of each signed statement. Betsy claimed she barely knew Mrs. Hughes, until Genevieve produced emails showing they'd had lunch together specifically to discuss concerns about Preston. Did you or did you not arrange for Stan Nolan's mortgage to be paid? Genevieve demanded. That was a charitable act, Milton blustered. He was struggling, and The payment came from a shell company that your accounting firm created specifically for this transaction. A company that existed for exactly 3 days before being dissolved. That's not charity, Mr. Cooley. That's witness tampering. Judge Romano had heard enough. Mr. and Mrs. Cooley, I'm finding your testimony to be contradictory, evasive, and frankly, unbelievable. Moreover, the evidence suggests you've engaged in fraud on this court. Do you understand the severity of that accusation? Betsy started crying. Real tears this time, not the manufactured sympathy from earlier. Milton looked like he might be sick. Your Honor, Grady tried one last time. My clients may have shown poor judgment, but their intentions were pure. They wanted to steal a child from her father using lies and money, Romano interrupted. And I won't have it in my courtroom. The emergency custody order is vacated immediately. Emma Lyon is to be returned to her father within the hour. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the state's attorney for investigation into witness tampering and fraud. Bailiff, take Mr. and Mrs. Cooley into custody. The courtroom exploded. Reporters scrambled for their phones. The Cooley's supporters gasped in shock. Milton grabbed his attorney's arm, but Grady was already backing away, not wanting to be associated with clients facing criminal charges. This is insane. Milton shouted as the bailiff approached. You can't. We're respected members of this community. We have rights. You had the right to petition for custody honestly, Romano said, his voice ice. You chose to commit crimes instead. Officers, remove them. Russell watched as Milton and Betsy Cooley were led away in handcuffs, their perfect facade shattered. Betsy was sobbing. Milton was shouting about lawsuits and connections and how this wasn't over. But it was over. Russell had seen this scene play out dozens of times with corrupt officials who thought their wealth and power made them untouchable. The expression on their faces was always the same when they realized the rules applied to them too. Preston sat frozen, tears streaming down his face. Emma, he whispered. Can I? The bailiff is already bringing her, Russell said gently. She's in a conference room with a social worker. She's safe, Preston. You can see her now. His son stood on shaking legs. Russell put an arm around him, and they walked together out of the courtroom, past the chaos, past the reporters shouting questions, into a quiet hallway. A door opened, and a social worker emerged holding Emma's hand. The little girl had blonde curls and her father's eyes. She looked tired and confused, but when she saw Preston, her face transformed. Daddy, she screamed, breaking free and running to him. Preston dropped to his knees and caught her, holding her so tightly Russell thought he might never let go. Baby girl, Preston sobbed. I'm so sorry. I'm here now. Daddy's here. Emma clung to him, crying. I missed you. Grandma said you were sick. Are you better now? I'm better. Preston managed through tears. So much better. And we're going home. Together. I promise you. Emma, I'm never letting anyone take you away again. Russell stood back, watching his son and granddaughter reunite, feeling something tight in his chest finally release. He'd spent 30 years putting bad people behind bars, but this, watching Preston hold Emma, knowing they were safe, this meant more than all those cases combined. Genevieve approached, a slight smile on her face. You know, most people would have handled this through proper channels. Most people's granddaughters aren't being stolen by corrupt millionaires, Russell replied. Thank you, Genevieve. I owe you. You don't owe me anything. That was the most satisfying courtroom moment of my career. She paused. The state's attorney is going to want your evidence for the criminal case. It's already compiled. I'll have it delivered this afternoon. She shook her head in amusement. Of course you will. You know, if you ever get bored in retirement, I could use an investigator with your skills. I'll think about it, Russell said, but his eyes were on Preston and Emma. His son was carrying his daughter toward them now, Emma's head on his shoulder, her eyes closing with exhaustion. She'd been through trauma that would take time to heal, but she was with her father. That was what mattered. Can we go home? Emma asked sleepily. Yeah, baby, Preston said. We can go home. They left the courthouse together as the sun reached its peak, casting long shadows across the steps. Behind them, Milton and Betsy Cooley were being processed into the system they'd thought they could manipulate. Their attorney was trying to arrange bail, but Romano had set it high enough to send a message. Russell put a hand on Preston's shoulder as they walked. You did good in there. I didn't do anything. You did it all. No, Russell said firmly. You kept Emma safe and loved for 4 years. You refused to give up when people told you you couldn't win. You trusted me when I said I'd help. That took strength, Preston. Don't sell yourself short. Preston shifted Emma to his other shoulder, her breathing deep and even now. Dad, I don't know how to thank you for. You don't have to thank me. You're my son. Emma's my granddaughter. Family protects family. Russell paused, then added quietly. I wasn't there enough when you were growing up. I missed too much, chasing cases and promotions. I can't get those years back, but I can be here now. And I am. Whatever you need, whenever you need it, I'm here. Preston's eyes filled with tears again. I know. And Dad, you being here now, that means everything. They reached the parking lot, and Russell helped secure Emma in Preston's car seat. She was fully asleep now, worn out from stress and emotion. Preston stood by the car, just watching her breathe, as if convincing himself she was really there. What happens now? Preston asked. The Cooley's lawyer was talking about appeals, Let him talk, Russell said. They're facing criminal charges for fraud and witness tampering. No judge is going to take their custody petition seriously after this. And I'll make sure the state's attorney has everything they need to prosecute. The Cooleys are done, Preston. They'll be lucky if they don't end up in prison. What about Emma? When she's older, when she asks about them, you tell her the truth. That they love their daughter so much they couldn't see past their grief. That they made terrible choices. That you forgave them, but you couldn't let them hurt her to make themselves feel better. Emma's smart. She'll understand. Russell put a hand on his son's shoulder. But that's a conversation for years from now. Right now, you just need to take her home and help her feel safe again. Preston nodded and got into his car. Russell watched them drive away, then sat in his own vehicle for a long moment. His phone was buzzing with messages, former colleagues who'd helped with the investigation, the state's attorney's office requesting an interview, even a reporter asking for a statement. He ignored them all. Instead, he thought about the look on Emma's face when she'd seen her father. The way Preston had held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The way justice had finally, definitively, been served. Russell had spent his career believing in the system, in the idea that truth and evidence could overcome corruption. He'd seen that belief tested countless times, watched guilty people walk free because they had better lawyers or more connections. But today, the system had worked. Today, the good guys won. He started his car and began the long drive home, already thinking about next week when Preston had promised to bring Emma for a visit. Russell had a granddaughter to get to know, a relationship to build. He'd been an absent father. He wouldn't be an absent grandfather. As for Milton and Betsy Cooley, they were learning a lesson Russell had taught many times over his career. Money and connections can buy you a lot, but they can't buy you everything. And they especially can't protect you when someone who knows how to dismantle corrupt systems decides you've gone too far. They should have checked who Preston's father was. But by the time they realized their mistake, Russell Lyon had already built their cage, and Judge Romano had locked the door. Justice had been served. A family had been reunited. And Russell Lyon, after 30 years of hunting corruption, had saved the people who mattered most. The road stretched ahead, and for the first time in years, Russell felt at peace. He'd spent his life fighting other people's battles. Today, he'd fought for his own family. And he'd won. 3 months later, Russell sat on his back porch watching Preston push Emma on the swing set he'd installed last week. The little girl's laughter rang out across the yard, pure and joyful. She still had nightmares sometimes, still occasionally asked about her grandma and grandpa. But she was healing, surrounded by love and stability. The criminal trial for Milton and Betsy Cooley was scheduled for next month. The state's attorney, a determined woman named Angelina McLaughlin, had been thorough in building her case. She discovered even more fraud than Russell had uncovered: falsified medical records, forged documents, and a pattern of manipulating people going back years. What Russell had exposed was just the tip of a very corrupt iceberg. "Hire, Daddy," Emma shrieked, and Preston obliged, pushing her until she flew through the air. Russell's phone rang. He considered ignoring it. He was officially retired, after all, but old habits died hard. The caller ID showed Genevieve Carlson. "Russell, I have a case you need to hear about," she said without preamble. "I'm retired, remember? A mother in Springfield lost custody of her twins to her ex-husband's wealthy family. The evidence against her smells as fake as what the Cooleys tried. She can't afford investigators. She's working 2 jobs and can barely pay rent, let alone fight millionaires in court." Russell watched Preston catch Emma at the bottom of the slide, both of them laughing. He thought about that desperate phone call 3 months ago, about how close he'd come to losing both of them to the Cooleys' manipulation. "Send me the details," he said. "I knew you'd say yes. But Genevieve, I'm not doing this for money. And I'm not doing it alone. Preston and I are a team now. Even better, I'll email you tonight." Russell hung up and walked over to where Preston was building a sandcastle with Emma. His son looked up, eyebrows raised in question. "How would you feel about helping me with something?" Russell asked. "There's another father out there who's about to lose his kids to people gaming the system." Preston glanced at Emma, then back at his father. "What would I do? I'm not an investigator." "No, but you know what it feels like to have someone try to take your child. That perspective matters. And you're good with people, Preston. You always have been. I can find the evidence. You can help me understand the human side." Emma tugged on Preston's sleeve. "Grandpa, are you going to help people like Daddy?" Russell knelt down to her level. "Something like that, sweetie. Sometimes good people need help when bad people are being unfair. Your daddy and I are going to make sure the good people win. Like superheroes." Preston laughed. "Not quite, baby. More like, Exactly like superheroes, Russell interrupted, winking at Emma. We just use folders instead of capes. That night, after Preston and Emma had driven home, Russell opened his laptop and read through the case Genevieve had sent. It was depressingly familiar. Wealthy grandparents claiming the mother was unfit, bought testimonies, manufactured evidence. But the mother, a woman named Clara Brock, couldn't afford to fight back. Her court-appointed attorney was overworked and underfunded. Russell began making notes, already seeing the patterns, the weaknesses in the grandparents' case. He'd do what he'd done for Preston, follow the money, find the truth, and deliver justice. Only this time, he wouldn't be working alone. He picked up the phone and called Preston. Dad, is everything okay? Everything's fine. I was just thinking, what if we made this a regular thing? You and me, helping families who are getting crushed by people with money and power. I've got the investigative skills. You've got the teaching schedule that gives you summers off. We could actually make a difference. There was a long pause. Dad, I have Emma to think about. I can't just. I know. And she comes first. Always. But think about it, Preston. We could help other kids stay with their parents. We could stop people like the Coolies from destroying families. We could turn what happened to us into something good. Another pause, longer this time. Can I sleep on it? Of course. But Preston, whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. The way you've handled everything. The father you are to Emma. You're a better man than I ever was. That's not true, Dad. You saved us. You would have done the same for Emma. That's what family does. After hanging up, Russell returned to his notes. He was 62 years old, supposedly retired. But sitting here, looking at Clara Brock's case, feeling the familiar pull of a puzzle that needed solving. This was what he was meant to do. Maybe not forever, but for now. For as long as families needed someone who knew how to fight the powerful and win. His phone buzzed with a text from Preston. I'm in. But only cases where we're sure we're helping the right people. And Emma comes to the office with us when she's not in school. She can be our mascot. Russell smiled and typed back. Deal. Welcome to the family business. He looked at the photo on his desk. Preston, Emma, and himself, taken last weekend at the park. 3 generations, connected not just by blood but by battle. They'd fought for each other and won. Now they'd fight for others. Milton and Betsy Cooley had thought they could use their wealth and connections to steal a child. They'd thought Preston was defenseless, that a middle-class teacher couldn't stand against their money and power. They'd thought wrong, and their mistake had cost them everything. More importantly, their mistake had created something they never intended. It had brought Russell and Preston closer than they'd ever been. It had shown Emma that her family would always fight for her, and it had given Russell a purpose more meaningful than any case he'd worked in 30 years. The Coolies would go to trial next month. Their lawyers were already negotiating plea deals, trying to avoid prison time. But the damage was done. Their reputation was destroyed. Their friends had abandoned them, and they'd never see Emma again. Russell didn't take pleasure in their suffering, but he didn't regret it either. They'd made their choices. They'd decided that their wants mattered more than a child's need for her father. They'd gambled that no one would stop them. They should have checked who they were gambling against. Russell Lyon, 30-year veteran of corruption investigations, had faced down senators and mob bosses. A couple of entitled grandparents from Chicago never stood a chance. They'd brought a checkbook to a war. Russell had brought 3 decades of experience dismantling people who thought they were above the law. The outcome had never really been in doubt. He closed his laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, Clara Brock was probably lying awake, terrified about losing her children. She didn't know it yet, but help was coming. The Lyon family business was open for clients, and they'd never lost a case yet. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.